Hey! So I'm back and I have come out of my hiatus to talk about a very important topic of a movie that came out a year ago. I do really think that this movie still needs to be talked about, especially after it being ignored at the Oscars. So I can make a whole video about the meaning and interconnectedness of any of the following topics: sweat, food, sharing clothes, the signal, camera angles. But I care about the music, so we're going to talk about the music. If you don't know, Challengers is a movie that came out in 2024. It is a story that follows Zendaya's character Tashi and these two men who fight for her attention, Pat and Art. And then it also buffers between these two past and present storylines with this 2019 tennis match between Pat and Art. So the setup of this movie is very non-linear, and the music kind of enhances that feeling, and I'll show you that more when we go through the breakdown, how it switches between genres and how the music starts and stops at seemingly random points. And if it's not obvious, spoilers ahead. I'm going to break this up into a few parts. We're going to start with a breakdown of each song, a quick little recap of where it takes place in the film and how it's being used and what it means. And then the intersection of EDM and classical music. And then the big question: why is it so loud? Also, I want to sneak in there a little part about the connection between tennis and sex and how that relates to the score. This score is by Atticus Ross and Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails. They have worked together on many different projects, such as The Social Network, Bones and All, Bird Box, Gone Girl, and The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. And now, Challengers. And each of these projects showcases their unique sound and the interesting vibe that they had in Nine Inch Nails. So we're gonna jump into the breakdown. We start with an opening shot, establishing and introducing the setting with this choir classical piece called Friday Afternoons in the background. When I watched this the second time and I was trying to figure out the meaning of these different pieces and why they're there, this one was something that I got a little stuck on. And then I found this really good analysis and review by Nick Sharon called Love All, Music and Image in Challengers. He says, interspersed with the original score are classical vocal pieces, each evoking a form of childlike innocence within the adult trio. So the fact that this is the opening shot and then it comes back a few different times within the score, this piece, Friday Afternoons, is there to remind the audience of the transformation of these three people. The next instance of music is the Challengers theme, the song that you think of when you think of Challengers. It's the first instance of EDM. It's when Pat and Art play their match in 2019. Patrick celebrates a point and Art gives the signal. If you don't know what I mean when I say the signal, I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. Tashi is watching this match at mid-court and her head is turning. And this is a recurring thing that happens to show where she's at within the relationships between the two men. The next song is called I Know. This composition happens when they are leaving for the match, and the music stops when Art is watching his tennis match on the TV. And then it starts again when Art gets lost in his thoughts. And then it stops again when he gets pulled out of his thoughts. And then he says, I love you to Tashi, and Tashi says, I know. And that's when this song starts yet again. It does feel like tennis. It feels as if the music and the movie are playing tennis with itself. Because the music is so loud, it feels so abrupt and feels so sudden when the music is finally taken away. So this stop and start is like a match between the music and the scene itself. The next song is called Yeah Times 10. Tashi enters the court, and when Pat and Art see her, there's no head turning as they watch the game. They are only focused on her, and if they do turn their head, it's a little glance to the other side. And a fun little thing that they did with this is that the head turning is in line with the music. It is at the same tempo and it goes on beat, which I think is a really awesome touch. The next song is called Love, and this is the piece that is fully classical. There's no EDM elements to this piece.
Hitting a ball with a racket is a great way to avoid having a job.
Well, that's also your problem. Because you think that tennis is about expressing yourself, doing your thing. That's why you still have that serve.
It is played when Tashi and Art and Pat are talking about tennis and how it feels to be playing tennis.
You don't know what tennis is.
What is it?
It's a relationship.
I think that this is a really interesting analogy because it is said and felt throughout the rest of the movie. Tennis is sex, and tennis is also everything. They think about tennis all the time. So if tennis is sex, then the idea of sex is tennis, maybe? So the fact that when Tashi is actively talking about the game of tennis, a non-EDM song is played, to me feels like she is talking about something other than tennis. So as they're having this deep conversation about what tennis means to them, classical is played, which is unlike anything else we hear throughout the movie when tennis is played. Now here's where I'm going to talk about The Signal, because the song itself is called The Signal. When this song plays, Art wants to know if Patrick slept with Tashi, and Patrick won't tell. And Art says, give me a signal. Art and Pat are practicing tennis. Patrick notices a tick that Art has where he moves the tennis ball into the center of the racket before he serves. And so Art tells Patrick to serve like him if anything happened between him and Patrick. I also think it's interesting that the signal is Art's serve, meaning that Art's serve is the default for sleeping with Tashi, which makes sense because he's the one who ends up with Tashi, so he is the default of sleeping with Tashi. Next we have a song called Brutalizer. This plays when Patrick and Tashi are getting intimate in their college dorm, and Tashi is criticizing his tennis or coaching him on his tennis, and Patrick asks, are we talking about tennis? And Tashi says, we're always talking about tennis. Tashi then stops being intimate with Patrick to go play tennis. Then we have the song Stopper, which has Tashi's motif, Tashi's theme in it from Yeah Times 10. Tashi plays a match, but Patrick doesn't go because he previously told Tashi that he's not her groupie. Art does go to the match, and this is where Tashi hurts her knee, and Art runs down to comfort her. Then we have another instance of Friday Afternoons, the choir piece, as Tashi is sitting by a tree and frustratedly taking off her brace. I think that this plays here because it marks the end of her tennis playing career. So then Love is played again, the classical piano piece. Tashi and Patrick have a fight about Patrick's dreams, and Tashi has to walk away because the way she thinks about tennis is different than the way that Patrick thinks about tennis. And then this classical piano piece does something interesting where it adds in some synthy EDM elements to it as the scene switches to a tennis match. So I think that this is really interesting because it shows a split between talking about tennis and playing tennis. Talking about tennis is now signified by this piano piece. This next one is called Brutalizer 2. This song happens when Patrick is wearing Tashi's I Told Ya shirt in the present day, and he finds her at a restaurant by herself and they kiss. This next one is called The Points That Matter. In present day, Art and Patrick run into each other in the sauna, and Art tells Patrick that he never grew up, and Art says, it's about winning, and I do, a lot. And Patrick says something about how Art has never won against him, and Art says, winning the points that matter, and Pat questions, I don't matter. And this just shows the wedge that Tashi has created between the two of them. The next one is called Pullover. Tashi and Patrick fight in the car. She asks Patrick if he will throw the game in Art's favor, and to Tashi, the two of these men are really only there for her to be played with. She's playing with them, she's making a game out of their lives. The next song is called Final Set, and this plays when Patrick wins a point. And then we have Pullover again. It blends in from the previous song. Patrick drives Tashi back to the hotel, and then they pull over. At this, there's like a big storm outside. Tashi and Patrick make out against the car as the Friday Afternoons choir song is played, which is a very interesting pairing. The storm and the heatedness of the intimacy between the two of them, paired with this innocent feeling song, is really jarring in the same way that a tennis match with loud EDM music is jarring. But if this song signifies innocence and their childhood, it makes sense that it's playing over her reconnecting with Patrick, because that's who she was with originally. Then we have the Match Point Challengers song. This song goes in and out. It stops and starts a lot. Tashi is watching and she seems to be unsure of how Patrick is going to play it. She doesn't know if he's going to listen to her and throw the game, or if he's just going to play it the way that he wants to play it. Patrick then gives the signal to show Art that Tashi and him slept together the night before. The music stops then, and Art kind of just stands there in shock. And then the song Match Point starts over. Art fires an angry serve. This song picks up back in full volume. And the ending is when Art goes to hit the ball and he jumps over the net and hugs Patrick, which results in tying the game and ending the game. And Tashi's reaction is at first anger and confusion, and then she gets up and she claps. So that takes us to the end of the movie. So in this next section, I'm going to talk about why they chose EDM to play in the background of the movie. So for this section, I read a paper on tennis etiquette called Modern Day Manners for Tennis Players by Patricia Napier Fitzpatrick. Basically, the rules go: always be polite, professional, and quiet. It is expected that players and fans are quiet. No celebrations. You're not supposed to celebrate your point. And you're supposed to be well groomed. So the expectations of tennis versus this EDM music is very jarring. It's not what people expect to hear when they're watching tennis. If anything, the piano music aligns better with the expectations of tennis. So when the piano music plays in moments where tennis is not even shown, it reminds the audience that everything is about tennis. So I have a quote from Billy Fellows, who wrote a review called "The Chaotic Challengers Soundtrack is Maddeningly Perfect." Reznor and Ross looked at these expectations and threw them out the window. In Challengers, the music is sometimes classical, providing a beautiful juxtaposition of a character's environment, such as when Tashi and Patrick stare at each other during a storm. Other times, Reznor and Ross's EDM tracks will blare during a tennis match, where silence is typically demanded. So the choice of putting EDM music in this film is a good one, I think. At first, it's really weird. As you're watching the movie, you're like, why is this dance club music playing over a tennis match? But when you think about the fact that tennis itself represents sex and the connection between these three people, both physical and emotional, it makes sense that this really intense dance music is being played over their tennis matches, because they have said that tennis is a really intimate thing to do between two people. So each time a match is played, it represents that connection between the two opponents in a way that's almost sexual. In this next part, let's answer why classical. Why are there a few classical pieces? I've said it before and I'll say it again. Everything is tennis except tennis. So when they talk about tennis, they're actually talking about something else on a deeper level. So when this piano piece called Love is playing and they're talking about tennis and they're talking about how it feels to play tennis with somebody else, they're actually talking about connections they make and setting us up to understand how the relationship between these three people work. Tashi has never really played tennis with Art or Pat. She only facilitates Art and Patrick playing tennis together. So she is the one who's maintaining their physical relationship. So here's another quote from Nick Sharon's analysis. "The score, composed by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, atmospherically paints the serene setting with a meandering B minor piano melody washed in a bed of synth and strings and wind, deceptively oscillating between the B minor tonic and G major 6. This creates a sense of tonal unmooring. There's no real musical resolution. We are volleying back and forth between the two chords, and neither has the advantage." I like the idea that this piece itself is playing tennis with itself. These two chords are going back and forth. So if we use musical agency is when you take elements of a piece of music and turn them into characters themselves that have relationships between each other. So in this sense, these two chords, the B minor and the G major, represent Patrick and Art. The way that this composition never really resolves and neither chord wins foreshadows the ending of neither guy winning. So that was a little side tangent. But why classical? Because that fits more so with the expectation of tennis. This song is quieter. It is not at the full volume that the EDM pieces are at. It doesn't fill every space of sound. It leaves room for silence. It leaves room for just conversation. So the fact that this piece is played during a non-tennis scene, when it might fit better in the expectation where tennis is actually being played, shows how they truly think about tennis and how they feel about tennis and how it corrupts everything else in their life. So this next part, I'm just gonna call sex. Because this movie is really all about sex, even when there's no sex scenes, which is really impressive, in my opinion. I'm going to start with a quote from Billy Fellows. "The EDM music never gives the audience the release they desire. It only continues to ratchet up and up until the final moment of the film where Tashi roars her approval after Art and Patrick share a brilliant deciding point. Each song starts right away. There's no build-up, there's no peak. The whole movie just feels like pent-up desire and attraction without any real conclusion to it or climax to it." Another quote that I have from Nick Sharon is, "A second theme is raw EDM computer music that amplifies the sexual competition between Tashi and Patrick. Their intimacy is no deeper than sex in a club." This observation is interesting to me too, because when Patrick and Tashi do become intimate in the car and in the storm, it is joined with the Friday afternoon's classical piece. So if their relationship is nothing more than sex in a club, it's met with the juxtaposition of the music, just like everything else. This score is supposed to challenge how the audience thinks and feels about the three of their relationships and their relationship to the game of tennis itself. So the intimacies between this love triangle is scored differently based on who it's with and what they're doing, whether it's an actual act of intimacy or just the act of playing tennis. This overly EDM score feels as if everything is sex except for sex, which is tennis. I'm saying this sort of sentence a lot because there's a lot of juxtaposition and there's a lot of opposition between the movie itself and the music, and the themes are contradicting themselves. This whole movie, this whole score is supposed to feel unresolved. It's supposed to feel at its peak at all times. So the fact that there's so much opposition is intentional. When there's a love triangle like that, there's always someone being left out. There's always a game being played, which is why the story of these three people is told through tennis. And the tennis in the movie is just used to facilitate the intimate relationships between these three people. And the music is so different than what is expected because it's playing tennis with the movie. So now, the question of the hour. Why so loud? This goes back to the expectations of tennis and the etiquette that is expected of tennis players. This etiquette is constantly being disrupted. We go into this movie knowing it's a tennis movie, and we hear this loud song that we were not expecting to hear in a tennis movie because the theme of tennis in the movie is opposing and playing a game with the score itself. Having music that was calm and collected during the tennis scenes, like we might expect, would do absolutely nothing to this story. This story, yeah, it's about tennis, but really it's about the relationship between these characters. So having such jarring music played over tennis visuals reminds us that tennis is so much more than just tennis to these three characters. This is a quote from a review by Tony Stamp. "Watching Challengers, it feels like the movie is in love with the music. It will suddenly abruptly start playing during dialogue scenes, sometimes almost drowning out the actors. In turn, the songs here are interrupted by various noises, an alarm, or the thwack of a tennis ball. The music is playing tennis between the diegetic audio, the dialogue and sound effects, and the non-diegetic audio." So to wrap this up, tennis is everything except for tennis, which is sex. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross are unbelievable film score composers. They scored this film in a way that didn't fit with the visuals, but created a whole new story in the audio that went along with things that were unsaid. Instead of just making music that will pair perfectly with the scenes and with the visuals, Reznor and Ross think of the audio as its own separate being. You could listen to this score as its own entity and as its own story. This score goes about the story in a different approach to the way the visuals went about the story. So it adds a whole new dynamic to the film instead of just being there for audible engagement and to work alongside the visuals. I don't know, hopefully you got something out of this. This is just my opinion on the movie and how the music works in the movie. You can have your own, and I'd love to hear it. So comment what you think the music does for the movie and why it's so damn loud. So bye!